When my husband passed away, I lost my world, but I still had his memories living inside those old farmhouse walls. I thought my brother would protect what my husband built with his own hands. But instead he took it, every brick, every corner, every piece of my heart. I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I believed in God's timing. The day my husband, Edward, passed away, the world grew painfully silent. We had built that old farmhouse together, brick by brick, dream by dream. He would wake before dawn, his hands rough from labor but his eyes soft with love. Every corner of that house carried his touch. When he took his last breath, I promised him I'd take care of what he left behind, his land, his memories, our life's work. But grief makes you weak in ways you don't understand. My brother Charles moved quickly. He came with comforting words, gentle smiles, and a voice that felt like home. "I'll help you, Margaret," he said. "You shouldn't carry all this burden alone." At first I believed him. He managed the papers, the accounts, and spoke with the lawyer after Edward's will was read. I trusted him as I always had. He was my elder brother after all. But soon things changed. Letters arrived with names I didn't recognize. Decisions were made without my voice, and one morning, when I went to the farmhouse, the gates were locked. Charles stood by the porch with a tone I had never heard before. "This isn't your home anymore, Margaret," he said coldly. My heart broke, but my faith whispered, "Be still." God sees what man hides, so I walked away, leaving behind not just a house, but the last piece of my husband's world. The days after losing the farmhouse were colder than any winter I had ever known. I moved into a small cottage near the village edge, a place where the roof leaked when it rained and the floor creaked with every step. Yet it was mine, and for that I was grateful. People whispered about what had happened. Some pitied me, others pretended not to know, but I didn't explain myself. I was tired of words. I spent my mornings tending to a small garden, just as Edward once did, whispering prayers between each seed I planted. Meanwhile, Charles turned the farmhouse into a symbol of his pride. He replaced the old wooden porch with marble steps. He tore down Edward's handmade gate and built a taller one with his initials engraved in gold. Every change felt like another wound. Sometimes I'd pass by the road and look from a distance. Through the open window, I could see his laughter filling the house that once held our memories. A few times he saw me standing there, and instead of shame, there was arrogance in his eyes. "Still mourning over a pile of wood and stone?" He shouted once. I didn't respond. I just lowered my gaze and walked away. I had no power, no money, no place in his world anymore. But I had something he could never understand. Peace, impatience, and faith in God's unseen plan. At night, when loneliness felt heavier than my blanket, I would whisper into the dark, "Edward, I kept my promise." I didn't fight for the farmhouse because I know one day God will fight for me. And in that silence, somehow I believed it. 2 years passed in quiet endurance. My life became simple: prayers at dawn, tending the garden, and visiting the small chapel every Sunday. My brother Charles grew wealthier, prouder, and more distant. People in the village began to call him the man of fortune. But fortune is a fragile guest. It never stays too long. One evening, while I was closing my cottage windows, I saw smoke rising from the hill where our old farmhouse stood. At first I thought it was just mist curling through the fields, but then the bell rang from the village tower. Fire. My heart stopped. I rushed through the muddy path, my shawl clutched tight, breath trembling. When I reached the farmhouse, flames were already licking the sky. The old wooden beams, the ones Edward had built with his hands, were collapsing into sparks. Charles stood there, helpless, shouting orders, but the fire had its own will. The marble steps he had built cracked under the heat. The golden gate melted like wax. Everything he had changed, everything he had taken pride in, was being swallowed by the same earth he had once stolen. No one could save it. The fire burned through the night until nothing but ash and silence remained. The next morning Charles came to see me. His eyes, once sharp with arrogance, were now dull and lost. "It's all gone," he whispered. "Everything." I looked at him quietly and said, "You built your house on my pain, Charles. But God does not let injustice live forever." For the first time, he had no words, only tears. And in that moment I felt no anger, only peace. God had seen it all. The farmhouse was gone, reduced to gray dust and charred memories. For most, it was a tragedy, but for me it was something else. A sign that what was once built on love could not survive on greed. After the fire, Charles changed. The man who once walked with pride now moved with silence. He visited me often, his voice trembling with regret. "I don't expect you to forgive me, Margaret," he said one morning, standing by my little garden. "I took from you what wasn't mine, and now I have nothing." I looked at his hands, once so sure, now shaking, and I realized that time had already punished him in ways I never could. His wealth was gone, his friends had turned away, and the house that had fed his pride was now dust beneath the wind. "Charles," I said softly, "I never wanted you to lose everything. I only prayed that you'd see what truly matters." He lowered his head and whispered, "And I finally do." From that day on, he helped me rebuild a small part of my garden. Sometimes we sat quietly together, speaking little, listening more. The bitterness that once lived between us slowly faded, replaced by the fragile peace of shared remorse. One evening, as the sun set over the fields, I felt the wind move through the trees, gentle, warm, like a whisper from Edward himself. I smiled faintly and said to myself, "Justice doesn't always come as punishment. Sometimes it comes as understanding and peace." And for the first time in years, my heart felt light. I had lost everything once, but in faith and forgiveness, I had found something greater. Life often tests us in silence. We lose what we love, we face betrayal from those we trust, and we wonder, does God really see it all? But His justice doesn't shout. It arrives quietly, when the noise has faded, when hearts have softened, and when truth can finally be heard. Margaret's story isn't just about losing a farmhouse. It's about keeping faith when everything else is taken away. Remember, what's built on greed never lasts, but what's carried with patience and faith always returns in peace. This was not a story of revenge. It was a story of divine balance. Because sometimes, God's justice isn't fire or punishment. Sometimes it's the calm that finally fills a broken heart.